The rifle didn't waver in Clara Brennan's frostbitten hands as she faced the man who'd come to destroy her life. Snow swirled through the broken window behind her, and 3 terrified children huddled against her skirts, their breath coming in visible clouds in the freezing air. Blood stained the floorboards where she'd collapsed from exhaustion just an hour before, but her eyes blazed with a fury that made even Elijah Thornton, the richest, coldest man in Montana Territory, hesitate at her doorway. "You want this house?" Clara's voice cracked with cold and defiance. "Then you'll have to bury me and my babies in the snow first." Eli had come to take her land. He hadn't expected to find something worth dying for. Before we journey into this story of frontier survival, impossible choices, and a love that shouldn't exist between a grieving widow and the man sent to destroy her, I want to invite you to stay with us until the very end, because what happens in this frozen Montana boarding house will change both their lives forever. Please, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories of courage and redemption travel across the miles. Now let's begin in the winter of 1884, when mercy was as scarce as warmth and second chances were harder to find than gold. December wind howled through Belmont Pass like a living thing, with teeth tearing at anything foolish enough to be out in it. Elijah Thornton pulled his coat tighter and urged his gelding forward through drifts that came up to the horse's chest. Behind him, his surveyor Marcus Webb shouted something the wind stole away. Eli didn't look back. He'd made this ride for one purpose, and weather wouldn't stop him now. The woman's boarding house appeared through the white curtain of snow like a ghost. 2 stories unpainted clabbered smoke struggling from a crooked chimney. One window showed lamplight. The others were dark or boarded over, or Eli's jaw tightened, broken entirely with canvas nailed over the holes. This was what stood between his railroad and completion. This wreck of a building on 10 acres of the only viable route through the pass. "Boss," Marcus pulled alongside his face, raw from cold. "Storm's getting worse. We should hole up here, try to negotiate in the morning when she's had all night to prepare her arguments." Eli swung down from his horse. "No, we settle this now." "It's Christmas Eve, boss." "It's business, Marcus. Sentiment doesn't change survey lines." Eli had learned that lesson 10 years ago when sentiment got his wife and son killed. He'd been in Denver closing a deal while Cheyenne raiders burned his ranch. Mary and Samuel had died because Eli believed business could wait. He'd never made that mistake again. He strode to the door and knocked. Hard. Deliberate. The knock of a man who wouldn't be turned away. Long silence. Then footsteps. Light, quick, frightened footsteps. The door opened a crack and a girl's face appeared. Maybe 10 years old. Dark hair, darker eyes, too thin. Far too thin. "Mama says we ain't buying nothing," the girl said. "I'm not selling. I'm here to see Mrs. Brennan. It's about her property." The girl's eyes went wide with something between fear and fury. "You're the railroad man." "I'm a railroad man. Is your mother home?" "Nora." A woman's voice sharp with alarm. "Get away from that door." The girl vanished. The door started to close, but Eli caught it with his boot. "Mrs. Brennan, I need 5 minutes of your time. I've ridden 20 miles in a blizzard. The least you can do is hear me out." "The least I can do is shoot you for trespassing." The voice came from deeper in the house now, and it wasn't bluffing. "Remove your foot or lose it." Eli held his ground. He'd been threatened by better than a desperate widow. "I have a legal right to be here, ma'am. I'm authorized by the territorial surveyor to assess this property for railroad acquisition. You were sent 3 letters of notification." "I can't eat notification letters, Mr. Thornton, and I won't house the man who's come to throw my children into the snow. Now get off my property before I make you regret that long ride." Eli looked at Marcus, who shook his head slowly. The unspoken message clear, boss. Maybe we should retreat. But retreating meant another day's delay, another day of costs mounting, another day closer to the deadline his investors had set. Another day of 60 workers sitting idle while snow piled up and spring contracts slipped away. "Mrs. Brennan," Eli said, gentling his voice the way he would with a spooked horse. "I don't want your children in the snow. I want to make you a fair offer for your land. Fair enough that you can relocate somewhere better than this." The silence stretched so long, Eli thought she might actually shoot. Then, 5 minutes. You and you alone. Your man stays outside. Marcus started to protest, but Eli waved him off. "Go stable the horses in her barn. Get them out of this wind." "Boss, you sure about—" "5 minutes, Marcus. What's she going to do?" As it turned out, quite a lot. The moment Eli stepped inside, 3 things hit him simultaneously: cold darkness and the acrid smell of a house where people were burning anything combustible to stay alive. The main room was bare except for a rough table, mismatched chairs, and a stove that clearly wasn't producing enough heat. Ice had formed on the inside of the windows. A woman stood by that stove, and she did indeed have a rifle. Old Springfield. Looked functional. Pointed directly at Eli's chest. "5 minutes," she said. "Speak your piece." Eli had expected a desperate widow. Defeated pleading, maybe trying to use tears to leverage sympathy. Clara Brennan was none of those things. She was perhaps 29, though hardship had aged her face beyond her years. Dark hair pulled back in a braid gone frizzy from the cold. Dress that had been patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible. Her hands on that rifle were steady, despite the shake of cold in her thin frame. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Hazel green shot through with gold, burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with the pathetic fire in her stove. This woman was cornered, and she knew it. But she hadn't surrendered. "Mrs. Brennan." Eli removed his hat, frontier courtesy, too ingrained to abandon even now. "I'm Elijah Thornton, Chief Surveyor for Montana Pacific Railroad. I'm here to discuss the acquisition of your property." "I know who you are, Mr. Thornton. The devil's reputation precedes him." 3 children had appeared from somewhere in the darkness. The girl who'd answered the door stood protectively in front of 2 smaller shapes. A boy, maybe 7 eyes red from crying or cold or both. A tiny girl couldn't be more than 4, clutching a corn-husk doll with half its stuffing gone. "These are my children," Clara said, though Eli hadn't asked. "Nora, Daniel, and Lucy. I want them to see the man who's come to make us homeless on Christmas Eve. I want them to remember." Eli felt something twist in his chest. Samuel would have been 7 now, same age as the boy. He forced the thought down, buried it deep where it couldn't touch him. "I'm not making you homeless, ma'am. I'm offering to purchase your property at fair market value. More than fair, actually. Enough for you to relocate and start fresh somewhere." "Where?" Clara's voice cracked like ice breaking. "Where exactly should I relocate Mr. Thornton to town, where boarding houses are full and won't take a widow with 3 children? To my sister-in-law in Denver, who's made it clear we're not welcome to the street. That's not my concern." The words came out harsher than Eli intended, but he couldn't afford sentiment. Couldn't afford to see this woman's desperation as anything more than an obstacle to overcome. "Not your concern." Clara repeated the words slowly, tasting them like poison. "My children freezing is not your concern. My daughter Nora, who hasn't had a full meal in 2 weeks, not your concern. My son Daniel, who still cries himself to sleep every night missing his father, not your concern." She lowered the rifle slightly, and Eli saw her hands were shaking now. Not from fear, from rage. "Tell me something, Mr. Thornton. Do you have children?" The question hit like a physical blow. Eli's hands clenched. "That's not relevant to—" "Do you have children?" Clara demanded. "Had," Eli said flatly. "I had a son. He died. Along with my wife. 10 years ago." Something shifted in Clara's face. Not pity. She was too angry for pity, but recognition. The kinship of loss. "Then you know," she said quietly. "You know what it's like to have everything torn away. You know what it feels like to fail the people who depended on you. My personal history doesn't change the survey line, Mrs. Brennan. No. But it should change whether you sleep at night. She set the rifle down against the wall with deliberate slowness. You want to see what fair market value looks like, Mr. Thornton? I'll show you. Clara moved to the stove and lifted the lid. Inside, not wood, books. She was burning books to keep her children from freezing. My husband built this boarding house with his own hands, she said, feeding another page to the flames. Thomas Brennan. Good man. Bad luck. He died in the Silver Bell mine collapse 6 months ago along with 17 other men. Mining company paid widows $50 compensation. $50 for a man's life. She closed the stove lid and turned to face Eli directly. This boarding house was Thomas's dream, his legacy to our children. Before he died, he made me promise I'd keep it, that I'd give them stability, a home, something solid beneath their feet. I promised him, Mr. Thornton. On his deathbed, I promised. Promises don't override legal claims, ma'am. No, they don't, but they override your timeline. Clara moved closer, close enough that Eli could see the dark circles under her eyes, the chapped rawness of her lips from cold, the fierce determination in every line of her face. You have 60 men waiting on this route. I have 3 children depending on this house. Your inconvenience versus their survival. So here's my counteroffer. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Eli recognized it, one of the notification letters his company had sent. But she'd written on the back. Calculations. Survey notes. A hand-drawn map that was surprisingly accurate. There's an alternate route, Clara said. 3 miles north through Widow's Pass. Adds 2 days to your construction timeline and requires an additional bridge across Silverbell Creek, but it's viable. I've surveyed it myself. Eli took the paper, studying her notes. His first instinct was to dismiss them. What could a widow know about railroad engineering? But the mathematics were sound. The route was possible. It just wasn't optimal. Mrs. Brennan, I appreciate the effort you've put into this, but Widow's Pass has steep grades that would require a 3% gradient for the first mile, flattening to 1.5 through the valley floor, Clara interrupted. I taught mathematics before Daniel was born, Mr. Thornton. I know exactly what your locomotives can handle. Eli stared at her. In his 15 years of railroad work, he'd never had a property owner present an alternate route backed by actual engineering calculations. This would cost my company an additional $30,000, he said slowly. Cheaper than the lawsuits I'll file. Cheaper than the newspaper stories about Montana Pacific Railroad throwing widows and orphans into blizzards. Cheaper than the territorial investigation when I write to every politician and investor in Denver. She wasn't bluffing. Eli could see it in her eyes. You'd really fight this, spend what little money you have on lawyers, and lose anyway when we exercise eminent domain. I'd fight until my last breath, Clara said simply. Because I have nothing left to lose except my promise to my husband. And I'm not breaking that promise for your timeline, or your investors, or your... She gestured at his expensive coat, his boots, the gold watch chain visible at his vest. Your comfortable life, built on other people's inconvenience. In the silence that followed, the little girl, Lucy, started to cry. Soft, exhausted sounds. She was shivering so hard, her corn-husk doll shook in her grip. Mama, I'm cold, Lucy whimpered. Clara's face transformed. The fierce defiance melted into such tender pain that Eli had to look away. She scooped the child up, wrapping her in a shawl that was more holes than fabric. I know, sweet pea. I know. Mama's working on it. Is the bad man going to take our house? Eli felt those words like a bullet. The bad man. That's what he was to this child. The villain in her story. He'd been called worse. Built an empire on being harder, colder, more ruthless than his competitors. You didn't survive in railroad business by being soft. But looking at Lucy's face, at the way Daniel held himself like a miniature soldier, ready to defend his mother at Nora's 2 adult eyes that had seen far too much hardship, Samuel would have been 7, would have had that same fierce protectiveness. "Mrs. Brennan," Eli heard himself say, "I'll survey your alternate route. If it's viable, if it meets engineering standards, I'll present it to my partners." Clara's eyes widened. "You mean it?" "I mean I'll survey it. I'm not promising anything beyond that." Eli pulled out his pocket watch. "Your 5 minutes are up, but I'll give you 60 days. 60 days to prove Widow's Pass is a workable alternative. If it is, we'll reroute. If it's not, you'll accept my original offer and relocate peacefully. And in those 60 days, I'll be staying in town or..." Eli looked around the sparse room. "If your boarding house takes guests, I'll rent a room here. Keep costs down, oversee the survey personally." "You want to stay here?" Clara's voice climbed with incredulity. "In the house you're trying to take?" "I want to verify your survey claims firsthand. Can't do that from town." "Mr. Thornton, I barely have food for my own children. I can't. I'll provide provisions." Eli pulled out his wallet, extracted $50. Clara's eyes fixed on the bills like they were pure gold. "For room board and supplies for your family while I'm here. In advance." He set the money on the table. Clara stared at it, her throat working. "This is charity," she said, voice strained. "It's business. I need accommodation. You provide it. That's an exchange of services, not charity." "It's..." Clara stopped looking at her children. At Lucy, shivering in her arms. At Daniel's hollow cheeks. At Nora's bare feet on the frozen floor. Pride warred with necessity on her face. Pride lost. 1 month, Clara said tightly. "You can stay 1 month. After that we renegotiate terms or you leave. Understood?" "Understood." "And you follow my rules. No liquor in this house. No profanity around my children. You eat what we eat, sleep where I tell you, and if I say leave, you leave. This is still my house." "For 60 days at least," Eli agreed. Clara's jaw tightened at the reminder, but she didn't argue. She simply picked up the $50 with shaking hands and tucked it into her apron pocket. "Nora, show Mr. Thornton to the back room. Daniel, help me get more wood for the stove. Lucy, you stay warm right here." The children moved to obey, and Eli was struck by their discipline. No complaints, no questions. They'd learned early that survival required obedience, just like Samuel had been learning before Eli cut off the thought savagely. He wouldn't think about Samuel, wouldn't let memory crack the walls he'd built. Nora led him through the dark house to a small room at the back, bare except for a narrow bed and a dresser with a cracked mirror. The window had canvas nailed over a broken pane. Ice crusted the walls. "This was Pa's room when he came home late from the mine," Nora said quietly. "Mama didn't want him waking the little ones. Now it's empty so you can have it." She turned to leave, but Eli stopped her. "Your mother. How long has she been burning books?" Nora's face was carefully blank. "Since we ran out of wood 3 days ago. She started with Pa's mining journals. Said he'd understand. Tonight she's burning her teaching books. Tomorrow, probably her Bible. There's no wood left at all. Ain't no money to buy it, and Mama won't take charity from town, won't give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg." "Why not?" Nora's eyes flashed with sudden anger so like her mother's that Eli took an involuntary step back. "Because they blame her for Pa's death. Say if she'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have taken the dangerous shifts. Say if she'd managed money better, he wouldn't have been in debt to the company store. Say a lot of things that ain't true and ain't fair." "I'm sorry," Eli said, and was surprised to find he meant it. "Don't want your sorry, Mr. Thornton. Want you to leave us alone." She walked out before he could respond. Eli stood in the frozen room listening to the wind howl, listening to Clara's voice murmuring comfort to her children in the main room, listening to the echo of Nora's words. They blame her. He knew something about blame, about guilt that ate at you from the inside, about wondering if different choices might have changed everything. Through the thin walls he heard Lucy ask, "Mama, will we have Christmas tomorrow?" Long pause. Then Clara's voice bright with forced cheer. Of course, Sweet Pea. We'll have the best Christmas ever. With presents. With love. That's the best present of all. Eli heard the crack in her voice on that last word. Heard what it cost her to lie to her child with hope in her voice. He looked at the canvas-covered window, at the ice on the walls, at the luxury of his wool coat hanging on a nail that probably once held Thomas Brennan's mining jacket. Then Eli did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He made a decision based not on profit or efficiency or protecting himself from feeling, but on what his wife Mary would have called simple human decency. He walked back to the main room where Clara was stirring something in a pot over the stove. Some kind of thin soup. Potatoes and onions, maybe. Nothing else. Mrs. Brennan, I need to send Marcus back to town for supplies. Give me a list of what your family needs. Food, firewood, whatever's necessary. Clara's spine stiffened. I told you I don't want... It's not charity. It's prepayment for board. If I'm staying here a month, I'll require adequate heat-functional windows and proper meals. Consider it an investment in my own comfort. Clara turned to face him, studying his expression with those two perceptive eyes. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. You could force us out with legal papers. Could wait until spring and take the land anyway. Why give me 60 days? Why offer provisions? Why? She gestured helplessly. Why care? Eli wanted to say he didn't care. That this was just pragmatic business. That preventing bad publicity was cheaper than fighting it. But standing in this freezing house with 3 children watching him like he was either salvation or damnation, with the ghost of his own son hovering at the edge of his vision, with this fierce, broken, impossibly stubborn woman refusing to surrender. Your daughter asked if I was the bad man, Eli said. I didn't like the answer I saw in my own head. Clara held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Daniel, get the writing slate. Mr. Thornton needs a supply list. Marcus returned 3 hours later with a wagon full of provisions. Firewood, real firewood enough to last through January. Flour, salt, pork. Dried beans. Cornmeal. Coffee, sugar. Blankets. Glass to repair the broken windows. Kerosene for the lamps. The children watched wide-eyed as Marcus unloaded it all, stacking it in the kitchen like treasure. Boss, Marcus muttered when Clara was out of earshot. This is 3 months of supplies. You said... I know what I said. Just get it inside before it freezes. When everything was unloaded and Marcus had left for town, Eli found Clara standing in the kitchen, staring at the abundance with tears streaming silently down her face. Mrs. Brennan, don't. Her voice broke. Don't apologize and don't explain. Just give me a moment. She wiped her face roughly with her apron and turned to him. In the lamplight, she looked impossibly young and impossibly tired all at once. Thank you, Clara said quietly. I know you said it's not charity, but I'm not a fool, Mr. Thornton. This is more than prepayment for board. This is kindness. And I haven't seen much of that lately. It's an investment in my survey accuracy, Eli said gruffly. Can't have you collapsing from exhaustion before we verify your alternate route. Of course. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Strictly business. Strictly business, Eli confirmed. But they both knew he was lying. That night, after the children were fed and warm for the first time in weeks, after Clara had cried again over the luxury of coffee and sugar, after Nora had whispered thank you, in a voice that cracked Eli's heart, he lay in the cold back room and stared at the canvas-covered window. What the hell was he doing? He'd come here to take this woman's land, to complete his railroad, to do what needed to be done without sentiment or hesitation, the way he'd done business for 10 years. Instead, he was stocking her pantry, repairing her windows, giving her hope that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. Mary would have approved. Samuel would have asked why it took him so long. Eli closed his eyes against the memories and tried to sleep. but all he could see was Lucy's face asking if he was the bad man. Clara's hands shaking as she fed pages from her teaching books into the stove. Daniel's red-rimmed eyes that mirrored the grief Eli had spent a decade trying to forget. 60 days, he told himself. 60 days to survey Widow's Pass, prove it was impossible, present his original offer, and move forward. 60 days, and then everything would go back to normal. But lying in Thomas Brennan's bed in a house full of people who'd somehow survived circumstances that should have destroyed them, listening to Clara sing her children to sleep with a voice like spun silver, Eli suspected that nothing would ever be normal again. And for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't sure if that terrified him or gave him hope. Dawn came reluctant through the canvas-covered window, pale and cold as a corpse. Eli woke to the sound of someone moving in the kitchen, quiet, careful movements designed not to wake sleeping children. He checked his pocket watch. 4:30 in the morning. He dressed quickly, his breath visible in the frigid air, and emerged to find Clara already at the stove. She'd built up the fire with the wood from last night's delivery, and the room held actual warmth for the first time since he'd arrived. She was kneading bread dough with methodical precision, her hands working the pale mass like it had personally offended her. "Mrs. Brennan." She startled, spinning to face him with flour on her cheek and wariness in her eyes. "Mr. Thornton, I didn't expect you up so early." "Railroad habit. We start before sunrise." He moved toward the coffee pot she had brewing. "May I?" "It's your coffee." The words came out more bitter than the brew. She turned back to her kneading with renewed violence. Eli poured himself a cup and watched her work. Her movements were tight, controlled, angry. "Something on your mind, ma'am?" "Several things, actually." Clara punched the dough hard enough to make the table shake. "Like how I'm supposed to look my children in the eye knowing I took charity from the man trying to steal their home. Like how I'm supposed to maintain any dignity when I'm so desperate I'll compromise every principle I have for a bag of flour and some firewood. We had an agreement. Room and board in exchange for don't." Clara's hands stilled on the dough. "Please don't insult my intelligence by pretending last night was a fair business transaction. You brought enough supplies to feed a family for 3 months. That's not prepayment, Mr. Thornton. That's pity." "It's not pity." "Then what is it?" Eli set down his coffee cup, searching for words that wouldn't sound like the sentiment he'd sworn off 10 years ago. "It's practicality. I need you functional and focused for the next 60 days. Can't have you distracted by starving children while we're surveying routes." "So it's still about the railroad, about your convenience." "Everything's about the railroad," Eli said, and heard how hollow it sounded even to his own ears. Clara studied him with those hazel eyes that saw too much. Then she returned to kneading, her movements gentler now. "My husband used to say that near the end. Everything was about the mine, about the debt, about making enough to get ahead. He stopped seeing us, really seeing us. Just saw problems to solve, mouths to feed, obligations to meet." She shaped the dough into a loaf with practiced hands. "It's a lonely way to live, Mr. Thornton." "I'm not lonely. I'm focused. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." She placed the loaf in a pan and covered it with a cloth. "You can be focused and still be lonely. In fact, I think sometimes being focused is just another word for being alone without admitting it hurts." Before Eli could formulate a response, footsteps pattered from the back room. Lucy appeared, her corn husk doll clutched to her chest, her face still creased from sleep. "Mama, it's warm." The child's voice held wonder, as if warmth were a miracle she'd stopped believing in. "The house is warm." Clara's expression transformed harsh lines, melting into tender joy. She knelt and opened her arms, and Lucy ran into them. "Yes, sweet pea, the nice man brought us firewood. Lots and lots of firewood." "Is he still the bad man?" Clara's eyes flicked to Eli, and he saw uncertainty there. She didn't know how to answer. "That remains to be seen," she said finally. "Now, let's get you dressed. We have a special Christmas breakfast today." With eggs? Lucy's eyes went wide. Real eggs. Real eggs. And bacon. And fresh bread when it rises. Lucy squealed and ran back to wake her siblings, and Clara straightened slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back. Eli noticed the wince she tried to hide. You hurt yourself. Old injury. Acts up in the cold. Clara moved to the pantry, pulling out the eggs and bacon Marcus had brought. I fell on the ice 2 weeks ago carrying water from the creek. Cracked a rib, I think, or bruised it badly. Hard to tell when you can't afford a doctor. You should have that examined. With what money, Mr. Thornton? The $50 you gave me. That's already spoken for back payments to the mercantile, the feed store, the landlord who owns the property this building sits on. She cracked eggs into a bowl with sharp, efficient movements. You see, I don't actually own this land. I rent it. Or rented it before I fell behind on payments. Another reason you're railroad taking it means I lose everything. I have no deed to sell, no equity to cash out. Just a lease I can't afford to keep. Eli felt something cold settle in his stomach. The notification letters we sent. They went to the property owner of record. Who doesn't live here and doesn't care? He was happy to negotiate with your railroad. Didn't bother mentioning there was a widow and 3 children living in the building. Clara set the bowl down hard. Surprise. That changes the legal situation. If you're not the landholder, then I have even less right to be here. Yes, I'm aware. Clara's voice went sharp as broken glass. Which is why I need that alternate route to work, Mr. Thornton. Because when your railroad takes this land, my landlord will evict me with exactly 0 compensation, and I'll have nothing. Not even the illusion of a deed to sell. Eli ran his hand through his hair, his mind already calculating. This was worse than he'd thought. If Clara had no legal standing, the railroad could proceed immediately. No buyout necessary. They just needed the landlord's signature, which they apparently already had. Does your landlord know you're still here? Oh, he knows. Sends his son around first of every month to collect rent I don't have. Last time Daniel threw rocks at him. Something that might have been pride flickered across Clara's face. My boy's got his father's sense of justice, if not his sense of self-preservation. Mrs. Brennan, if you have no legal claim to this property, then you can throw me out today, instead of 60 days from now. Yes, I understand the math, Mr. Thornton. Clara turned to face him fully, and her eyes blazed with that familiar defiance. So let me be very clear. I don't care about legal claims or property rights or whatever papers you have locked in some office in Denver. This is my home, these are my children, and I will fight you with every breath in my body until you physically remove me. Are we clear? Crystal. They stared at each other across the kitchen, the air between them crackling with challenge and something else Eli couldn't quite name. Then Clara's expression shifted, softened just a fraction. But I'd rather not fight you, she said quietly. I'd rather prove Widow's Pass works, and we both get what we need. You get your railroad. I keep my home. Nobody loses. Somebody always loses, Mrs. Brennan. That's how business works. Then maybe business is broken. Before Eli could respond, all 3 children tumbled into the kitchen, talking over each other in their excitement about the warm house and the promise of breakfast. Nora had braided Lucy's hair and buttoned Daniel's shirt wrong, and both younger children were bouncing with an energy Eli suspected came from actually sleeping warm for the first time in weeks. Mama, is it really Christmas? Lucy grabbed Clara's skirt. Can we open presents? Clara's face went still. Sweet pea, I told you we'd have Christmas, but I know presents cost money, and we don't got none. Lucy's enthusiasm dimmed, but didn't die. But maybe Santa came anyway, even though we didn't have a chimney fire for him to come down. Eli watched Clara's heart break in real time, watched her kneel down and cup her daughter's face with hands that trembled just slightly. Baby Santa knows we've had a hard year. Maybe he'll come next Christmas when things are better. But I was good, Mama. I was so good. I didn't complain when I was cold, and I shared my doll with the mice in the walls so they wouldn't be lonely, and I... Lucy's voice cracked. Did Santa forget about us? Clara pulled her daughter close, and Eli saw her throat work as she swallowed tears. Santa didn't forget. Mama made some mistakes and... It's not your fault, Mama. Nora's voice cut through fierce and protective. It's not your fault Pa died. It's not your fault the mine company didn't pay. It's not your fault the town blames you. And it's not your fault we don't have Christmas presents. Then whose fault is it? Daniel's voice was tight with anger. Somebody's got to be to blame. The boy's eyes landed on Eli, and the accusation there was clear. You. You're to blame. You and men like you who take and never think about what you're taking from. Eli should have walked away. Should have let Clara handle her children's disappointment the way she'd clearly been handling everything else alone with fierce dignity and breaking heart. Instead, he heard himself say, "Get your coats." Everyone turned to stare at him. "I'm sorry." Clara stood slowly, Lucy still clinging to her skirts. "Get your coats," Eli repeated. "All of you. There's something I need to show you, and we need to leave now if we're going to be back before dark. Mr. Thornton, it's Christmas morning. Whatever survey work you need to do can surely wait until... It's not survey work, it's... Eli trailed off, unsure how to explain an impulse he didn't fully understand himself. "Just trust me. Please." Clara searched his face, looking for deception or ulterior motive. Eli kept his expression neutral, though his heart was hammering with something that felt dangerously like hope. Finally, Clara nodded. "Children, get dressed warmly. We're going... somewhere." 20 minutes later, they were all packed into Eli's wagon, Clara on the bench beside him, the 3 children bundled in the back under blankets Marcus had brought. The morning was clear and brutally cold, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache with each breath. But the sun was out, turning the snow-covered pass into something close to beautiful. "Where are we going?" Daniel asked for the 3rd time. "You'll see," Eli said. "That's not an answer," Nora observed. "It's the only answer you're getting." Lucy had fallen asleep almost immediately, lulled by the wagon's movement and probably still exhausted from weeks of poor sleep in a freezing house. Daniel kept up a running commentary on everything they passed that rock looked like a bear. That tree was definitely haunted. Did Mr. Thornton know that his pa had once seen a mountain lion right about here? Clara sat silent beside Eli, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. "You're wondering if I've lost my mind," Eli said quietly, pitched so only she could hear. "The thought crossed my mind. It's Christmas. Even railroad men observe Christmas." "Do they?" Clara glanced at him. "I was under the impression railroad men observed only profit margins and construction schedules." "Most days you'd be right." Eli guided the horses around a drift. "Today's different." "Why?" "Because Lucy's face when she asked if Santa forgot them reminded me of Samuel asking the same thing the Christmas before he died. Because I've spent 10 years avoiding everything that makes me feel human and I'm tired. Because you looked at me like I was either salvation or damnation, and I'd rather be the former." "Because it's practical," Eli said instead. "The children need winter clothes, can't have them freezing while we're surveying, and you need to see the pass in winter conditions to understand the engineering challenges. So this is still about the railroad." "Everything's about the railroad," Eli said, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. Clara made a soft sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "You're not a very good liar, Mr. Thornton." "I'm an excellent liar. Built an empire on it." "Then why do I know you're lying now?" Eli had no answer for that, so he focused on driving. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon and the muffled crunch of snow under the wheels. "Your wife and son," Clara said eventually. "What were their names?" Eli's hands tightened on the reins. "Mary and Samuel." "How old was he, Samuel?" 7. Almost 8. "Daniel's age?" "Yes." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that why you stayed last night?" Why you brought the supplies? Because you looked at my children and saw yours. I stayed because it made business sense. And I'm the Queen of England. Clara turned to look at him directly. You're trying to convince yourself you're still the hard man who rode up to my door yesterday. But I saw your face when Lucy asked if you were bad. I saw you flinch when Daniel glared at you. You're not as cold as you pretend to be. You don't know me. No, but I know grief. I know what it looks like when someone builds walls so high they can't see the sky anymore. Her voice went soft. I know what it costs to survive loss by refusing to feel anything at all. And yet you feel plenty. I watched you nearly collapse when Lucy asked about Santa. Because I have to feel it. I have 3 children depending on me to be human, to love them, to show them the world isn't entirely cruel. Clara looked back at her sleeping daughter. You don't have that. Nobody depending on you to be anything but successful and wealthy and powerful. Must be lonely. We've had this conversation already. No, we've danced around it. But I'm asking directly now. She turned back to him. Are you lonely, Elijah Thornton? The use of his first name sent something electric through Eli's chest. Nobody had called him Elijah in years, just Thornton, or boss, or sir, or from his investors, that ruthless bastard who always delivers. Yes, he heard himself admit. I'm lonely. Satisfied. Not remotely. Clara's hand moved as if to touch his arm, then stopped. But it's a start. They reached Belmont 3 hours later, the small mining town huddled in the valley like it was trying to hide from the mountains. Eli pulled the wagon up in front of Miller's Mercantile, the largest store in town. Daniel sat up immediately. This is where the mean man works. The one who comes for rent. Mean man? Eli looked at Clara. Harold Miller. My landlord's son. He's not fond of us. Clara gathered Lucy into her arms as the child stirred awake. Mr. Thornton, I don't think this is a good idea. Trust me. You keep saying that, but you haven't given me a reason to. Eli climbed down and came around to help Clara from the wagon. When he offered his hand, she hesitated, then took it. Her fingers were cold, even through her worn gloves. The reason is that I'm asking, Eli said quietly. And for today, for Christmas, I'm asking you to let me do something that isn't about the railroad or business, or any of the things I use to protect myself from feeling. I'm asking you to let me give your children a Christmas, please. Clara's eyes searched his face, looking for the angle, the trap, the ulterior motive. Eli kept his expression open, honest, in a way he hadn't been in years. Why? She whispered. Because Lucy asked if Santa forgot her, and I don't want her to believe the world is that cruel. Because Daniel looks at me like I'm the enemy, and maybe I am, but I don't want to be. Not today. Eli's voice dropped even lower. Because you're burning your books to keep your children warm, and nobody should have to make that choice. Because it's Christmas, and I'm tired of being the bad man. Tears shimmered in Clara's eyes, but she blinked them back. One Christmas. Then we go back to our corners and fight about the railroad. One Christmas. Eli agreed. He helped the children down, and they all trooped into Miller's Mercantile in a cluster. The store was warm and smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. Harold Miller stood behind the counter, a heavy-set man with a perpetual sneer. Well, well, if it isn't the Brennan charity cases. Miller's eyes flicked to Eli, and his expression shifted to something approximating respect. Mr. Thornton, didn't expect to see you in town on Christmas. Mr. Miller, I need winter clothes for 3 children and their mother. Your best quality. Miller's eyebrows rose. You're outfitting them. I am. And I'll need boots, coats, gloves, scarves. Whatever's necessary for Montana winter. Spare no expense. Clara made a small sound beside him, but Eli kept his attention on Miller. That'll run you upwards of $200, Mr. Thornton. Then put it on my account. Eli turned to the children who were staring wide-eyed at the abundance around them. "Pick what you need. And Nora," he caught the eldest daughter's eye, "make sure your mother picks things for herself too. She's being practical and self-sacrificing. Don't let her." Nora's lips twitched in something that might have been a smile. "Yes, sir." "Mr. Thornton, I can't—" Clara started. "You can and you will. Consider it payment for services rendered." At her confused expression, Eli continued, "You're going to help me survey Widow's Pass. Guide work in unfamiliar terrain is worth at least $200. This is advance payment." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it, but it gave Clara the fig leaf of dignity she needed. She nodded slowly. "Services rendered. Fine." For the next hour, Eli watched the Brennan family transform. New wool coats replaced threadbare shawls. Sturdy boots replaced shoes with holes. Lucy got a red scarf that made her squeal with delight. Daniel got a hat with ear flaps that made him look like a miniature trapper. Nora got a coat with actual pockets which she touched reverently like it was made of gold. And Clara got a cloak of deep blue wool that brought out the gold in her hazel eyes. She also got gloves and boots with real soles and a dress that wasn't held together with patches and hope. When Miller tallied the total $247, Clara looked faint. "Add it to my account," Eli said. Along with, he surveyed the store toys. "Whatever toys you have suitable for children these ages." "Toys?" Miller looked confused. "Mr. Thornton, it's not exactly toy season and my inventory—" "Whatever you have. Dolls, balls, games, books. Doesn't matter." 20 minutes later, they left the store with more bags than they could carry. Lucy had a new doll with actual clothes. Daniel had a wooden train set and a book about cowboys. Nora had a collection of fairy tales and a set of colored pencils for drawing. Clara held her packages like they might evaporate if she squeezed too tight. They loaded everything into the wagon, and Eli was about to climb up when Clara's hand caught his sleeve. "Wait!" He turned to find her standing very close, her new cloak wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice shook. "Please don't say it's business. Please don't say it's about the survey or your convenience or any of those things you use to protect yourself. Just tell me the truth." Eli looked at her, this fierce, broken, impossible woman who'd faced him down with a rifle and then burned her books to keep her children warm. Who'd fought him at every turn while somehow making him want to be better than the man he'd become. "Because I forgot what it felt like to be human," he said quietly. "And you're reminding me. And it hurts, but it's also," he searched for the word, "necessary. Like setting a broken bone. Painful, but right." Clara's free hand came up to touch his face, just for a moment, her cold fingers against his cheek. "Thank you, Elijah." Then she pulled away and climbed into the wagon, leaving Eli standing in the snow, his heart hammering his carefully constructed walls, crumbling faster than he could rebuild them. The ride back was different. The children chattered excitedly about their new things, making plans for how they'd play with their toys, what they'd do with their books. Lucy sang a Christmas carol off-key. Daniel laughed at something Nora said. And Clara sat beside Eli, not speaking, but her presence felt different now. Less wary, more something. Something Eli was afraid to name because naming it would make it real, and real things could hurt you. When they reached the boarding house, the children tumbled out of the wagon and ran inside with their packages, eager to try on their new clothes and play with their toys. Clara hung back, helping Eli unload. "I should probably tell you," she said, not looking at him, "that what you did today, that was the kindest thing anyone's done for us since Thomas died. It's Christmas. People do kind things at Christmas. No, they don't. Not for us." Clara turned to face him, and her expression was complicated gratitude mixed with fear, mixed with something else. "The people in town, they've been happy to see us suffer. Happy to watch me fail. They think Thomas's death was God's judgment, and our poverty is what we deserve. That's a cruel way to think. It's a common way to think, especially about widows who won't beg or bow or play the tragic figure. Clara hugged the last package to her chest. But you didn't come here to be kind, Elijah. You came to take my land. So what happens when Christmas is over and we go back to being adversaries? I don't know. That's not very reassuring. It's honest. Eli met her eyes. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if Widow's Pass is viable. I don't know if I can save your home. I don't even know if I should try, because it goes against every business principle I've built my life on. Then why? Because Lucy asked if Santa forgot her, and I couldn't. Eli's voice caught. I couldn't let her believe that. And because you're right. I have been lonely. And because for the first time in 10 years I'm starting to remember what it felt like to care about something other than profit margins and protecting myself from pain. Clara stepped close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, see the way her breath came faster. That's terrifying, isn't it? Caring again. Absolutely terrifying. Good. Clara's lips curved in a slight smile. At least I'm not the only one who's scared. They stood there in the snow packages between them, something unnamed and fragile growing in the cold air. Then Lucy's voice called from inside, and the spell broke. Mama, come see. My new doll can sit up. Clara laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Duty calls, she said. Thank you, Elijah, for giving them this, for giving me the memory of their happiness. Whatever happens with the railroad, I'll have today. She turned and went inside, leaving Eli alone with the wagon and his thoughts. He should be planning, should be calculating how to leverage this goodwill into cooperation, how to use Clara's gratitude to smooth the way for his railroad. That's what the old Elijah would have done, the one who saw every human interaction as a transaction, every kindness as investment. But standing there in the snow, listening to children's laughter spilling from the house, remembering the way Clara had touched his face and called him by his given name, Eli realized with a jolt of pure terror that he didn't want to leverage anything. He just wanted to hear that laughter continue, wanted to see Clara smile without that edge of desperation, wanted to be the kind of man who deserved the trust he saw growing in her eyes. You're in trouble, Thornton, he muttered to himself. Because somewhere between arriving at this boarding house to take Clara's home and buying her children Christmas presents, he'd stopped seeing her as an obstacle to overcome. He'd started seeing her as someone worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth. Eli cut off that thought before it could fully form. It was too soon, too dangerous, too likely to end in the same kind of pain he'd sworn never to feel again. But as he walked inside and saw the Brennan family gathered around their new things, saw Lucy hugging her doll with tears of joy streaming down her face, saw Daniel actually smile at him, shy but genuine, saw Nora mouth thank you with fierce gratitude, and Clara watching it all with an expression of wonder, Eli knew it was already too late to protect himself. He was falling, had been falling since Lucy asked if he was the bad man, and he'd seen his own reflection through her eyes and hated what he saw. Now he just had to figure out if falling meant crashing or flying, and whether Clara would catch him or let him fall. The surveying began 3 days after Christmas, when the weather cleared enough to make the trek through Widow's Pass possible. Eli woke before dawn to find Clara already dressed in her new boots and cloak, packing provisions into a canvas bag with practiced efficiency. "You're coming with me?" Eli asked from the doorway. Clara didn't look up. "You said you needed a guide. I know this pass better than anyone living. Thomas and I used to hike it every Sunday before the children came." Her hands stilled briefly on the bag. "Back when we still had time for things like that." "What about the children?" "Martha Yates from town owes me a favor. She's coming at 7 to watch them." Clara pulled the drawstring tight on the bag. "Don't worry, Mr. Thornton. I won't slow you down." "I wasn't worried about that." "Weren't you Clara finally met his eyes and the challenge was back. The Christmas truce was over, apparently. They were adversaries again, and she was reminding him of it with every sharp word. I'm sure you've been wondering if dragging along a woman who hasn't had a decent meal in months will compromise your precious survey timeline. Actually, I was wondering if your cracked rib is healed enough for mountain hiking. Clara's expression flickered. It's fine. That's not what I asked. It's fine enough. She moved past him toward the door. Martha will be here soon. You should eat something before we leave. It's a 6-hour hike to the summit and back. Eli caught her arm, gently stopping her. Clara. She froze at his use of her given name. They'd been carefully formal since Christmas morning, both retreating to the safety of surnames and social distance. If you're not well enough, I'm well enough. Clara pulled her arm free, but her voice had lost some of its edge. I have to be well enough, Elijah, because if I'm not there to show you exactly why Widow's Pass works, you'll find some engineering reason to dismiss it. I know how men like you think. Present the problem, undermine the solution, justify the original plan. Men like me. Rich men. Powerful men. Men who've never had to choose between pride and survival. She turned to face him fully. Men who can afford to be principled because they've never been desperate. You think you know me. I think I know your type. I was married to a version of you. Remember, Thomas had dreams of being wealthy, of building an empire. Spent so much time chasing that future he forgot to live in the present. Forgot his wife needed more than plans and promises. Forgot his children needed a father who was present, not perpetually absent chasing the next opportunity. Clara's voice went quiet. By the time he died, I'd been a widow for years. His death just made it official. Eli absorbed this understanding dawning. You're afraid I'll do the same thing. I'm not afraid of anything you'll do because I'm not fool enough to depend on you. But her eyes told a different story. Christmas was lovely, Elijah. Thank you for giving that to my children. But it doesn't change the fundamental truth you're here to take my home, and I'm here to stop you. Let's not pretend otherwise. Martha Yates arrived precisely at 7, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour permanently embedded under her fingernails. The children greeted her with enthusiasm, and Lucy immediately dragged her to see the new doll. Clara gave Martha instructions. Eli suspected were unnecessary. The woman clearly knew her way around children, and then they were out the door into the brittle morning cold. They walked in silence for the first hour, following a narrow trail that climbed steadily through pine forest, heavy with snow. Eli carried the surveying equipment, transit measuring chains, notebooks, while Clara led the way with sure-footed confidence. She'd been right about knowing the terrain. She moved through the forest like she was part of it, anticipating obstacles before they appeared, choosing paths that seemed random but always proved optimal. Your husband, Eli said, eventually breaking the silence. Did you love him? Clara stopped so abruptly, Eli nearly ran into her. She turned, and her expression was complicated. What kind of question is that? A relevant one. You said you'd been a widow long before he died. I'm wondering if you ever had what you wanted, or if you've been compromising your whole life. Why do you care? I don't know. Eli adjusted the equipment on his shoulder. Maybe because I did the same thing. Married Mary because she was suitable, appropriate, exactly what a man building a railroad empire needed. Loved her, yes, but he searched for the word practically, safely, without risk. And then you lost her anyway. And then I lost her anyway. Eli looked at Clara, really looked at her. So I'm asking, did you love Thomas Brennan, or did you marry him because he was your best option? Clara was quiet for a long moment, her breath coming in visible clouds. Then she started walking again, and Eli fell into step beside her. I loved who I thought he was, she said finally. The man who courted me in St. Louis, who talked about building something meaningful in the West, who promised me partnership and adventure. That man I loved desperately. She ducked under a low branch. But that man disappeared somewhere between Missouri and Montana. The Thomas who died in the mine was a stranger wearing my husband's face. Bitter, desperate, always angry at the world for not giving him what he thought he deserved. Do you blame him? I blame the circumstances that broke him. I blame the mine owners who paid poverty wages. I blame the company store that kept him perpetually in debt. I blame the system that treats men like disposable equipment. Clara's voice hardened. But yes, I also blame him. For drinking. For making our poverty worse. For choosing pride over practicality. For dying and leaving me alone with 3 children and debts I didn't create. That's honest. You asked for honest. Clara glanced back at him. What about you? Do you blame Mary for dying? The question hit like a fist to the gut. Nobody had ever asked him that. Nobody had dared. Yes, Eli admitted. I blame her for not taking Samuel and leaving when I told her to. I blame her for thinking she could defend the ranch alone. I blame her for, his voice cracked, for not being there when I came home. For making me find their bodies. For leaving me alive when I wanted to die with them. Clara stopped walking again. This time when she turned, her eyes held understanding instead of challenge. And you've spent 10 years punishing yourself for surviving. Wouldn't you? If you'd been able to save them and chose business instead. Elijah, you didn't choose business over them. You couldn't have known. I should have known. There were reports of Cheyenne in the area. I should have sent them to Denver, should have hired guards, should have... Eli couldn't continue. The weight of 10 years of should-haves crushed his chest. Clara set down her pack and came to him. She put her hands on his arms, grounding him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Stop, she said firmly. Stop torturing yourself with scenarios you couldn't control. Thomas made me an expert in should-haves. Should have stopped him from drinking, should have managed money better, should have seen the mine was unsafe. I can drive myself mad with should-haves, or I can accept that sometimes terrible things happen and nobody's to blame. Someone's always to blame. No, sometimes life is just cruel and random and unfair and we do our best, and it's not enough and we survive anyway. Her grip tightened. You survived Elijah. That's not a sin. It's not something to punish yourself for. It just is. It doesn't feel like survival. It feels like penance. Then maybe it's time to stop doing penance and start actually living. They stood there in the snow-heavy forest close enough that Eli could see the frost on Clara's eyelashes, see the way her breath quickened, see something shift in her expression from sympathy to something more dangerous. Clara. Don't. She stepped back quickly, breaking the moment. Don't say whatever you're about to say. We're not doing this. Doing what? Pretending there's something here beyond 2 people trapped in an impossible situation trying to salvage what they can. Clara picked up her pack with shaking hands. You'll survey the pass. You'll determine it's not viable. You'll take my land. And I'll have to start over somewhere else. That's how this ends, Elijah. Let's not complicate it with feelings neither of us can afford. What if the pass is viable? Then maybe we both get lucky. But her tone said she didn't believe in luck anymore. They hiked the rest of the way in tense silence, the unspoken thing between them growing heavier with each step. By the time they reached the summit of Widow's Pass, the sun was high and the view was staggering. Miles of snow-covered valley stretched in every direction, and Eli could see exactly why Clara believed this route would work. He set up the transit and began taking measurements while Clara pointed out landmarks, explained drainage patterns, identified potential obstacles. She'd been right about her mathematical ability. Her calculations were precise, her understanding of the terrain sophisticated. Under other circumstances, Eli would have hired her as a surveyor. The grade here is steep, Eli said, checking his figures. 3% like you said. But we'd need to cut through that rock formation, and winter blasting is dangerous but possible. The Northern Pacific did it in '82 when they pushed through Mullen Pass. Similar geology, similar conditions. Clara moved to stand beside him at the transit. I've done my research, Elijah. This route works. It's harder than your original plan, yes. More expensive, yes. But it works. It would add 40,000 to the budget, not 30. Can your railroad afford 40,000? Yes. Then what's the problem? Eli looked at her, and the problem was standing right there in front of him. The problem was that approving this route meant telling his partners he'd chosen a widow's home over optimal efficiency. Meant admitting he'd let personal feelings influence business decisions. Meant opening himself up to the same kind of vulnerability that had destroyed him 10 years ago. The problem is you, Eli said quietly. Clara's breath caught. Me? You make me want things I swore I'd never want again. You make me question every principle I've built my life on. You make me remember what it felt like to care about something other than being right or being rich or being safe. He turned to face her fully. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive losing someone again. Who said anything about losing? Everything ends, Clara. Every good thing I've ever had, I've lost. My parents, Mary, Samuel. If I let myself care about you, about your children, it's just a matter of time before... Before what? Before life happens. Before circumstances change. Clara's voice rose. Elijah, that's not protection. That's just a different kind of death. You're so busy avoiding loss that you've lost anyway. Lost years, lost opportunities, lost joy. At least I'm not in pain. Aren't you? Clara moved closer, her eyes blazing. You're in constant pain. I see it every time you look at Daniel and remember Samuel. Every time Lucy calls you kind and you flinch. Every time you try to convince yourself that Christmas was just business and not you desperately trying to remember how to be human. Stop. No, because somebody needs to tell you the truth. Clara's hands fisted in his coat. You're dying, Elijah. Maybe not physically, but in every way that matters. And you're using business and control and emotional distance to justify it, but it's still death, still surrender, still choosing fear over life. I'm not afraid. You're terrified, terrified that if you let yourself feel again, the pain will destroy you. Terrified that caring equals losing. Terrified that maybe, just maybe, you don't deserve happiness after what happened to Mary and Samuel. Eli grabbed her wrists, stopping her words. Don't psychoanalyze me. Then don't lie to me. Or yourself. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm scared too, Elijah. Scared of depending on you and having you leave. Scared of trusting you and having you choose your railroad over my children. Scared of wanting this, she gestured between them, and having it be one more loss I have to survive. Then we agree. This is impossible. Yes. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to shed. Absolutely impossible. We should maintain distance. Definitely. Strictly professional. Completely professional. They stared at each other, still close enough that Eli could feel her breath on his face, see the gold flecks in her eyes, see the way her pulse hammered at her throat. Clara. She kissed him. Or he kissed her. Eli wasn't sure who moved first. Only that suddenly his arms were around her, and her hands were in his hair, and they were kissing like drowning people gasping for air. It was desperate and fierce, and probably a terrible idea, but Eli couldn't stop. Didn't want to stop. Clara tasted like coffee and determination, and something sweet he couldn't name. Her body fit against his, like it was made to be there, and when she made a small sound in the back of her throat, Eli felt something crack open in his chest that he'd thought was permanently sealed. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, neither willing to step back. That was, Clara started. A mistake, Eli finished. Completely. Can't happen again. Absolutely not. Clara. She kissed him again, softer, this time slower, and Eli let himself have it, let himself feel it, let himself want without immediately calculating the cost. When they separated this time, Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I can't lose anyone else, she whispered. I can't give my children hope that there might be stability, might be someone who stays, and then have you leave. They've lost too much already. I know. So, this whatever this is, it can't go anywhere. Even if the pass works. Even if I keep my home. Because you're still a railroad magnate who lives in Denver, and I'm still a widow with 3 children who can barely afford to eat. Our worlds don't overlap, Elijah. No matter how much we might wish they did. I know that too. Then why did you kiss me? Because I'm tired of surviving, Eli said simply. And you make me want to live. Even if it hurts. Even if it ends badly. Even if I lose everything again. You make me want to try. Clara's hand came up to cup his face, her thumb brushing his cheekbone. You're going to break my heart, aren't you? Probably, but you'll break mine first. She laughed, the sound wet with tears. At least we're honest about the damage we'll do. Brutal honesty, it's a start. They stood there a moment longer, memorizing the feeling, knowing it was temporary. Then Clara stepped back and wiped her eyes with businesslike efficiency. We should finish the survey. It's a long hike back, and I need to be home before the children worry. Clara, please don't. Her voice cracked. Don't say anything that makes this harder than it already is. Let's just finish the work and pretend the last 10 minutes didn't happen. I don't want to pretend. But we have to. Because I'm not strong enough to want you and lose you both. Clara picked up her pack with shaking hands. So we'll pretend. We'll maintain distance. We'll be professional. And in 60 days, when you've made your decision about the pass, we'll go our separate ways like reasonable adults. And if I can't do that, then you're more selfish than I thought. Clara met his eyes, and hers were hard, now protective. Because I have 3 children who've already lost one father. I won't let them lose another just because I was foolish enough to fall for a man who can't commit to anything but his railroad. The accusations stung because it was fair. Eli couldn't promise permanence. Couldn't promise he'd choose Clara over his business. Couldn't promise he wouldn't retreat back into the safe emotional distance that had protected him for 10 years. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Clara's voice broke. Just help me save my home. That's all I'm asking. The rest is too complicated. They finished the survey in brittle silence, taking measurements and recording data with professional detachment. The pass was viable. Eli knew it in his bones. More expensive, more difficult, but absolutely viable, which meant he had a choice to make. Approve the alternate route and save Clara's home, proving he'd let personal feelings override business judgment. Or stick with the original plan, take her land and destroy whatever fragile thing had started growing between them. Business or humanity? Profit or principle? Safety or risk? The old Elijah would have known immediately which to choose, would have calculated the cost-benefit analysis and made the decision that maximized return while minimizing emotional investment. But standing on Widow's Pass with Clara's kiss still burning on his lips and the ghost of her touch still warming his skin, Eli realized the old Elijah was dying. Had been dying since he'd walked into a freezing boarding house and met a woman who'd rather burn books than surrender. The question was whether the new Elijah, the one who remembered how to feel, how to hope, how to want more than mere survival, could survive what came next. They hiked back as the sun dropped toward the mountains, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Clara maintained careful distance, walking ahead, not speaking unless necessary. The Christmas truce was over. The kiss was forgotten. They were adversaries again, and she was reminding both of them with every careful step. But Eli couldn't forget. Couldn't unsee the vulnerability in her eyes when she'd admitted she was scared. Couldn't unfeel the way she'd fit in his arms like she belonged there. Couldn't unwant the impossible future that had flickered through his mind when she'd kissed him, a future where he wasn't alone, where children's laughter filled his house, where someone waited for him at the end of long days. A future he had no right to want and no idea how to build. When they reached the boarding house, dusk had fallen and lamplight glowed warm in the windows. They could hear the children inside arguing cheerfully about something. Normal domestic sounds that made Eli's chest ache with longing. Clara stopped at the door and turned to him. In the fading light, she looked impossibly tired and impossibly beautiful all at once. "The survey?" she asked. "The pass works. The route is viable." Something flickered in her eyes. Hope maybe, or relief, or fear of hoping. "And will you recommend it to your partners?" This was the moment, the decision point, the place where Eli either proved he was still the man who'd ridden up here to take her land without conscience, or admitted he'd become someone different. Someone who might choose a woman's home over a railroad's efficiency. Someone who might risk his heart again. "I don't know yet," Eli said honestly. "I need to run the numbers. Present the data to my partners. Make sure you're covered if they question your judgment," Clara finished. "Make sure you can justify choosing sentiment over profit. Make sure you don't risk anything that might make you vulnerable." "Clara, it's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You're still protecting yourself, Elijah. Still choosing safety over risk. And I understand that. I do. But I can't." Her voice broke. "I can't wait for you to decide whether I'm worth the risk, so you'll forgive me if I don't hold my breath waiting for your approval." She went inside, leaving Eli alone in the dark with his equipment and his conscience. He should follow her. Should explain that business decisions took time. Required deliberation couldn't be made on impulse. No matter how much he wanted to just say yes, the route is approved, your home is saved. But Clara was right. He was still protecting himself. Still calculating. Still unwilling to commit without maintaining an escape route. Still the same man who'd chosen Denver over his family 10 years ago, just in a different situation. Eli looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The same stars that had shone the night Mary and Samuel died. The same stars that had witnessed every cowardly decision he'd made since every time he'd chosen safety over courage. "I don't know how to do this," he said to the night. "I don't know how to care without destroying. How to commit without losing. How to be the man she needs when I'm so broken." The stars didn't answer, because stars never did. They just kept shining constant and indifferent to human struggles. Eli gathered his equipment and walked inside where Clara was helping Lucy wash up for bed, and where Daniel was building something elaborate with his new wooden trains, and where Nora was reading by lamplight, her face peaceful in a way it probably hadn't been for months. Where life was happening messy and complicated and real. And Eli realized with perfect clarity that he had a choice. He could keep trying to control outcomes, calculating risks, protecting himself from pain. Or he could step into the chaos and trust that maybe, just maybe, caring was worth the cost. The question was whether 10 years of emotional scar tissue would let him make that choice, or whether he'd retreat back into the safe, lonely fortress he'd built and watch Clara and her children slip away like everything else he'd failed to protect. The telegram arrived 4 days after the survey delivered by a rider who'd pushed through fresh snow to reach the boarding house. Eli took it from the man's frost-bitten hands and paid him extra for the trouble, then stood in the doorway, reading words that changed everything. Widow's Pass route rejected. Stop board demands, original timeline. Stop, proceed with acquisition immediately. Stop. Construction begins March 1st. Regardless, stop. Clayton Marsh. Eli read it 3 times, the paper crinkling in his tight grip. Clayton Marsh, his business partner, the man who held 40% of Montana Pacific's stock. The man who'd been arguing for aggressive expansion regardless of cost, human or financial. The man who'd never met Clara Brennan and didn't care to. "Mr. Thornton," Clara's voice came from behind him. "Is something wrong?" Eli turned to find her standing with flour on her hands and worry in her eyes. She'd been baking bread, filling the house with warmth and the yeasty smell of rising dough. Filling it with home. "My partners rejected the alternate route," Eli said flatly. "They want the original plan. Want me to proceed with acquisition immediately." He watched the color drain from Clara's face, watched her hands go still. watched hope die in her eyes and get replaced with something harder, something that looked like resignation mixed with fury. I see. Her voice was carefully controlled. When they want construction to begin March 1st. That gives us, Eli calculated quickly, 6 weeks. 6 weeks to find a miracle. Clara's laugh was bitter. Or 6 weeks for me to pack my things and figure out where 3 children and a desperate widow can go in the middle of a Montana winter. Clara, don't. She held up one flowery hand. Don't apologize or explain or try to soften this. You warned me this might happen. I chose not to believe you because believing meant accepting I'd already lost. She turned back toward the kitchen. Thank you for the honesty at least. Some men would have let me keep hoping. Eli followed her, catching her arm, before she could disappear into her work. I'm not accepting this. Clara pulled free. You don't have a choice. Your partners rejected the route. That's how business works, isn't it? Majority rules. I'm sending a telegram to Denver, requesting a meeting with the full board. I'll present the survey data myself, make the case for Widow's Pass. And if they still say no, then I'll... Eli stopped, realizing he didn't know how to finish that sentence. What would he do if the board refused? Walk away from Montana Pacific, forfeit his shares, destroy the empire he'd spent 15 years building, for a woman he'd known less than 2 weeks. That's what I thought, Clara said quietly. You'll do what businessmen always do. You'll accept the decision, take my land, and tell yourself you tried. That it's not personal, just business. That you gave me more consideration than most would have. That's not fair. Fair. Clara's voice rose. You want to talk about fair. My husband dies in a mine collapse and the company pays me $50. That's fair. I work myself to exhaustion trying to feed my children, and the town blames me for not managing better. That's fair. A wealthy railroad decides my home is inconvenient and I lose everything. That's fair. No. Eli's voice was steady. None of it's fair, and I'm not accepting it. You keep saying that, but words don't change reality. Clara moved to the stove, checking the bread with mechanical precision. In 6 weeks, you'll take this house. I'll take my children and whatever dignity I have left, and we'll start over somewhere else. That's reality, Elijah. Everything else is just pretty lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Before Eli could respond, the front door crashed open. Daniel burst in his face, raw from cold, and streaked with tears, blood dripping from his split lip. Mama! The boy's voice cracked. Mama, they said terrible things. Clara was across the room in an instant, gathering her son close despite his height and age. Who said things? The Miller boys, in town. Daniel was shaking from cold, or emotion, or both. They said they called you. He couldn't finish, just buried his face in his mother's shoulder. Nora appeared in the doorway, Lucy clutching her hand. Nora's face was pale, but composed in that too-adult way she had. Harold Miller's sons ambushed us near the Mercantile, Nora said quietly. Called Mama a whore. Said she was selling herself to Mr. Thornton for money and presents. Said that's why we suddenly had new clothes and food. Eli felt rage surge through him, hot and immediate. Where are they now? Ran off when Daniel fought back. Nora's voice held fierce pride. He bloodied Tommy Miller's nose before they ganged up on him. 3 against 1, the cowards. Clara pulled back to examine Daniel's face, her hands gentle, despite the fury Eli could see building in her eyes. The boy's lip was split and already swelling, and bruises were forming on his cheekbone. Did they hurt you anywhere else? Clara asked. Just my pride. Daniel's attempt at bravery cracked. Mama, I tried to make them stop. Tried to tell them you're a good woman, but they just laughed and said everybody knows what kind of arrangement you have with the railroad man. Hush now. Clara pulled him close again. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. But Eli saw the shame in her eyes, saw the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to protect herself from blows that had already landed. This was what he'd done to her. His presence, his gifts, his inability to maintain proper distance, he'd given the town ammunition to destroy her reputation. "I'm going to town," Eli said, already moving toward the door. "No." Clara's voice stopped him. "You'll only make it worse. Worse, they're spreading lies about you attacking your son. And if you defend me, you confirm every ugly rumor." Clara's voice was steady now, emptied of emotion. "Don't you see, that's how this works? I'm a widow, you're a wealthy man. Any association between us gets twisted into something sordid. Your defense becomes proof of guilt. I don't care what they think. But I do. I have to live here, Elijah. Have to shop at their stores, attend their church, send my children to their school. My reputation is all I have, and you've—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I'm not blaming you. You've been kind. But kindness toward women in my position always comes with a cost." Eli wanted to argue, to insist he could fix this, make it right. But Clara was correct. His very presence had painted a target on her back. His gifts, however well-intentioned, had given credence to the worst assumptions about desperate widows and wealthy men. "Then I'll leave," Eli said. "Today, I'll take a room in town, maintain proper distance, and confirm their suspicions that we had something to hide." Clara laughed without humor. "There's no good move here, Elijah. Stay and feed the gossip. Leave and validate it. We're trapped by propriety and circumstance, and the town's determination to believe the worst." Lucy started crying, overwhelmed by tensions she was too young to understand. Nora picked her up, murmuring comfort, while Daniel stood rigid in his mother's arms, trying not to let anyone see him cry. This was what caring looked like, Eli realized. This was the cost of stepping outside safe boundaries. Not just his own vulnerability, but the damage his presence inflicted on people who couldn't afford it. "What do you need from me?" Eli asked quietly. Clara met his eyes, and hers held exhausted defeat. "I need you to decide. Are you taking my house or not? Because this limbo where we're not adversaries but not allies either. I can't do it anymore. My children are getting hurt. My reputation is destroyed, and I'm falling for a man who's going to leave anyway." Her voice cracked. "So decide, Elijah. Make your choice, and let me start rebuilding whatever comes next. Clara, decide." It wasn't a request. It was a demand born of desperation. "Board approval or not, you have power here. Use it or don't. But stop making me hope when hope just makes this harder." Before Eli could respond, someone pounded on the door. Hard, aggressive knocking that made Lucy whimper and Daniel tense like he was ready to fight again. Eli opened it to find Harold Miller on the doorstep, his face red from cold, or anger, or both. Behind him stood two other men Eli didn't recognize, townsmen, with the hard expressions of people convinced of their own righteousness. "Mr. Thornton." Miller said, his voice dripping false courtesy. "We need to discuss your living arrangements. My living arrangements are my business. Not when they involve corrupting a widow and exposing children to moral depravity." Miller tried to look past Eli into the house. "Mrs. Brennan, you need to come with us. The town council has questions about your fitness as a mother." Clara appeared at Eli's shoulder, her spine straight and her eyes blazing despite the fear Eli could feel radiating from her. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Harold Miller. This is my home. A home you can't afford. A home you're only keeping through immoral arrangements with this man." Miller's gaze slid to Eli with undisguised contempt. "We have reports of him living here unchaperoned. Reports of expensive gifts. Reports of improper conduct that makes this an unsuitable environment for children." "Reports from who?" Clara demanded. "Your sons who just attacked my boy. Your father, who's been trying to evict me for months. Convenient how these reports surface right when the railroad needs my land. This isn't about the railroad. This is about decency." Miller pulled out a paper from his coat. "I have a writ from Judge Blackwood authorizing removal of minor children from homes of questionable morality pending investigation." The words hit like physical blows. Eli watched Clara go pale, watched her sway slightly, watched her hand fly to her mouth. "You can't take my children." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, Harold, you can't." "I can and I will, unless you agree to certain terms." Miller's smile was cruel. "Vacate this property immediately, relinquish any claim to the land, and accept placement of your children with suitable families until you can prove stable housing and moral character." Suitable families meaning people you choose, people who'll make sure I never get them back. Clara's hands were shaking. "This is extortion. This is child protection." Miller gestured to his companions. "Now you can come peacefully or nothing." Eli stepped between Miller and Clara, his voice dropping to deadly quiet. "You're not taking those children. You have no legal standing here, Mr. Thornton. You're not the husband, not the father, not even a relative. You're just a man with questionable intentions taking advantage of a desperate woman. I'm a man with enough money to bury you in lawsuits if you touch those children." Eli moved closer to Miller, using his height advantage. "And enough connections to make sure every newspaper in Montana Territory knows how a landlord and his cronies conspired to steal a widow's home by threatening her children." Miller's confidence wavered. "You're bluffing. Try me. Take one step toward those children and find out how quickly I can make your life difficult." Eli's voice went even quieter, more dangerous. "You think you know who I am, Miller? You know the reputation, the ruthless bastard who always gets what he wants. So ask yourself, do you really want me as an enemy?" The men behind Miller shifted uncomfortably. They'd come expecting to intimidate a widow and children, not face down a wealthy railroad magnate with rage in his eyes and the means to follow through on threats. "This isn't over," Miller said, but he was backing away. "Judge Blackwood will hear about this. Make sure he does, and make sure he knows I'll be filing a formal complaint about abuse of judicial authority. Judge Henderson in Belmont owes me several favors. I'm sure he'd be interested in how his colleague is using writs to facilitate land theft." Miller and his companions retreated to their horses, throwing threats over their shoulders that sounded hollow even to them. When they'd ridden off, Eli turned to find Clara collapsed against the doorframe, shaking so hard she could barely stand. "He was going to take them," she whispered. "He was going to take my children. But he didn't." Eli wanted to touch her to offer comfort, but knew his touch had already caused enough damage. "And he won't. I'll make sure of it." "How you can't stay here forever protecting us? You have a railroad to build, a business to run, a life in Denver that doesn't include a scandal-ridden widow and her children. Clara, go." Her voice was barely audible. "Please, Elijah, just go. Your presence here is destroying us. Every day you stay, the rumors get worse. Every kindness you show us gets twisted into something ugly." "I can't." Her voice broke completely. "I can't watch my children suffer because I was foolish enough to let you close." "You're not foolish, and I'm not leaving you vulnerable to men like Miller." "Then what are you doing?" Clara looked up at him with eyes full of tears and desperation. "Because from where I'm standing, you're making everything worse. You've given me hope that maybe someone cares, maybe someone will help, maybe we won't lose everything. But you won't commit to actually saving us because your board said no, and business is business, and protecting yourself is more important than protecting my children. That's not fair. None of this is fair." Clara's composure finally shattered. "I'm burning books to stay warm while you sleep in a mansion in Denver. My son gets beaten for defending my honor while you calculate profit margins. My daughter asks me why the nice man is making everyone hate us, and I have no answer because I don't understand it myself." She was crying now. Great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. The children appeared in the doorway, drawn by their mother's tears, their faces frightened and confused. "You want to help us, Elijah? Then make a choice. Approve that alternate route and damn what your board thinks. Or take our land and damn what I think. But stop this middle ground where you're not quite committed, but not quite gone, because it's killing me. It's killing all of us." Eli looked at Clara, crying at Daniel with his split lip, at Nora, holding Lucy, who was sucking her thumb at the fear and confusion and desperate hope in all their faces. He thought about Mary and Samuel, about how he'd chosen business over them and paid for it with their lives, about how he'd sworn never to make that mistake again. But here he was paralyzed by the same calculations, the same fear of choosing wrong. Except this time, he knew what the cost of choosing business would be. Could see it in Clara's tears, in her children's fear, in the destruction of the fragile family he'd started to feel part of. "I'm going to Denver," Eli heard himself say. Clara's face crumpled. "Of course you are. To meet with the board in person, to make them approve Widow's Pass." Eli moved closer, taking Clara's shoulders gently. "And if they refuse, I'm walking away from Montana Pacific. I'll forfeit my shares, break my contracts, do whatever it takes to stop this railroad from taking your home." "You can't. That would destroy everything you've built." "Then I'll build something else." Eli's voice was firm now, certain. "I spent 10 years building an empire on the graves of everyone I loved. I'm done with that. If saving you means losing Montana Pacific, then I lose Montana Pacific." "Elijah, you're not thinking clearly. The grief, the guilt, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 10 years. Eli cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I love you, Clara. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you'd rather burn every book you own than surrender. I love how you fight for your children. I love how you made me remember what it means to be human instead of just successful." Clara's breath caught. "You can't love me. You barely know me." "I know you well enough to know I don't want to be the man who destroyed you. I want to be the man who chose right for once, who put people before profit, who was brave enough to risk everything for something that matters. And if the board refuses, if you lose everything, then I'll have you. And that's more than I've had in 10 years. Clara searched his face, looking for doubt or deception. Eli kept his expression open, honest, letting her see the fear and hope and desperate determination. "You're going to regret this," she whispered. "Probably. But I'll regret losing you more." He kissed her, then gentle and brief, aware of 3 pairs of young eyes watching. When he pulled back, Clara was crying again, but softer now. "How long will you be gone?" 3 days if the weather holds. 4 if it doesn't." Eli looked at the children. "Daniel, you're the man of the house while I'm gone. Keep your mother and sisters safe." Daniel straightened, pride and responsibility warring on his young face. "Yes, sir. Nora, if Miller or anyone comes back, you send word to Marcus Webb at the railroad camp. He'll handle it until I return." "I will, Mr. Thornton." Nora's voice was steady adult. "And Lucy." Eli knelt down to the little girl's level. "Your mama's going to worry while I'm gone. Can you make her smile for me?" Lucy nodded solemnly, then threw her arms around his neck in an impulsive hug. "Come back, Mr. Eli. Please come back." Eli held her, this child who barely knew him, but trusted him anyway, and felt something in his chest crack open completely. "I'll come back," he promised. "I swear it." He stood and found Clara watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Fear and hope and something else. Something that looked like the beginning of belief. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said softly. "Then I'll keep them all." Eli touched her face one more time. "Trust me, Clara. I know I haven't earned it yet, but trust me. I'm trying." "That's enough. For now, that's enough." Eli left within the hour, riding hard for the train station in Belmont. The weather was brutal, the temperature dropping as another storm system moved in, but he pushed through. He had 3 days to reach Denver, convince his board and get back before Clara lost hope completely. 3 days to prove he was different from every other man who'd promised her safety and delivered disappointment. 3 days to choose right for the first time in 10 years. The train couldn't move fast enough. Eli sat in his private car, watching Montana landscape blur past, going over arguments in his head. The financial data that showed Widow's Pass was viable. The publicity nightmare of forcibly removing a widow and children. The moral argument that some things mattered more than optimal efficiency. But he knew his board didn't care about morality. They cared about returns and timelines and beating competitors to market. Clayton Marsh, especially the man who'd built his fortune on aggressive expansion and considered human cost irrelevant. Eli would have to make a business case, not an ethical one. Would have to convince them that rerouting was the smart choice, not just the right one. And if he couldn't convince them, he'd have to follow through on his threat. Walk away from Montana Pacific, forfeit everything he'd built, and somehow find a way to stop the railroad anyway. The magnitude of what he was risking hit him somewhere outside Helena. 15 years of work, his entire fortune, his reputation, his identity as the ruthless businessman who always delivered, all for a woman he'd known 2 weeks and 3 children who weren't his. He must be insane. But sitting in the expensive private car that represented everything he'd achieved through cold calculation and emotional distance, Eli realized he didn't care. Would rather be insane and human than sane and dead inside. Would rather risk everything and fail than play it safe and lose Clara. Denver appeared through the train window. On the third day, the city sprawled across the plains, with the Rockies rising behind it like judgment. Eli's stomach churned with nerves he hadn't felt in years. He went straight to the Montana Pacific offices, not bothering to stop at his house or clean up from the journey. The receptionist's eyes widened at his appearance, unshaven, rumpled, looking more like a desperate prospector than a railroad magnate. "Mr. Thornton, we weren't expecting. Is the board assembled?" "Yes, but Mr. Marsh said—" "I don't care what Marsh said. Tell them I'm here and we're meeting now." He pushed past her into the conference room where 5 men sat around a mahogany table that had cost more than most families earned in a year. Clayton Marsh at the head, looking smug and powerful in his expensive suit. The other board members, Peterson Williams, Chen Rodriguez, looking uncomfortable at Eli's abrupt entrance. "Thornton." Marsh leaned back in his chair. "Got my telegram, I see. Glad you understand the situation." "I understand you rejected Widow's Pass without reviewing the data." "I reviewed it. The route adds 40,000 to budget and 2 weeks to timeline. We don't have 2 weeks. Northern Pacific is pushing through Bozeman as we speak. If we don't complete by April, we lose our competitive advantage. If we forcibly remove a widow and orphans, we lose our moral standing." Marsh laughed. "Since when do you care about moral standing? You built this company on acquiring land the fastest, cheapest way possible. Don't go soft on me now because you got attached to some woman." Eli's hands clenched. "Her name is Clara Brennan, and she's more than some woman. She's an obstacle to completion, nothing more." Marsh stood, meeting Eli's glare. "Look, I understand. She's probably pretty definitely desperate. But we have contracts, Thornton, obligations to investors. You can't sacrifice Montana Pacific's future for your guilty conscience." "It's not guilt. It's—" Eli stopped searching for words that would penetrate Marsh's cynicism. "It's choosing right instead of expedient. It's remembering that behind every property line is someone's life, someone's home, someone's future." Very poetic. Still bad business. Marsh looked to the other board members. "Gentlemen, I move we proceed with original acquisition plan. Compensate Mrs. Brennan, fair market value, and begin construction March 1st. All in favor?" "Wait." Eli pulled out his surveying notes, spread them across the table. "Look at the data. Widow's Pass is viable. Yes, it costs more up front, but it gives us better grades, more stable geology, and avoids the political nightmare of forcibly displacing families." Peterson leaned forward, studying the notes. "These numbers are solid. Numbers are always solid until winter storms close the pass or spring floods wash out the new bridge." Marsh's voice was dismissive. "Thornton's letting sentiment cloud judgment. We all know what happened to his family. We all understand why he's over-identifying with this widow's situation. But we can't run a railroad on his emotional issues." The room went silent. Eli felt rage surge through him, white-hot and dangerous. "My emotional issues," he said quietly, "are that I spent 10 years becoming you, Clayton. Cold calculating, convinced that human cost was irrelevant compared to profit margins. And it made me rich and miserable and dead inside." "But it made you rich," Marsh countered. "Isn't that the point? Is it?" Eli looked around the table at men who'd spent decades chasing wealth. "What's the point of building empires if we destroy ourselves in the process? What's the point of winning if we lose everything that makes winning meaningful? Philosophy won't build railroads, Thornton." "Maybe. But neither will the bad publicity when newspapers cover the story of Montana Pacific destroying a mining widow's home." Eli played his final card. "Clara Brennan is educated, articulate, and sympathetic. Her husband died saving my cattle. She's raising 3 children alone while I, the man who should be grateful, am taking her home. How do you think that plays in papers across the territory?" Williams shifted uncomfortably. "He has a point. Public sentiment matters." "Public sentiment is temporary. Completion dates are forever." Marsh turned to Eli. "You're too close to this, which makes your judgment unreliable. I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of proceeding with original plan." Marsh's hand went up. Then Peterson's, though he looked unhappy about it. Against, Rodriguez and Williams raised their hands. "Mr. Chen." Chen, the quietest board member, studied Eli thoughtfully. "Mr. Thornton, if we approve Widow's Pass, will you guarantee completion by mid-April?" "I guarantee I'll do everything in my power." "That's not a guarantee." "No honest answer could be. Weather, labor issues, equipment failures, construction always has variables." Eli held Chen's gaze. "But I guarantee I'll work twice as hard on a route I believe in than one I'm ashamed of." Chen nodded slowly, then raised his hand. "Against the original plan." 2 against 2 for Marsh's vote, breaking the tie. The original plan stood. Eli had lost. He looked around the table at men he'd worked with for years, men who'd helped him build Montana Pacific into a regional power, men who'd just chosen efficiency over humanity. "Then I resign," Eli said clearly. "Effective immediately. I'm out." The room exploded with protests, but Marsh just smiled coldly. "You can't resign. You have a 3-year contract with penalty clauses that would bankrupt you." "Then bankrupt me. I'm not taking Clara Brennan's home." "You don't have to. I'll handle acquisition personally." Marsh's smile widened. "In fact, this works out perfectly. You're clearly compromised. I'll oversee Montana operations, complete the original route, and you can stay in Denver nursing your conscience. Everyone wins. Except Clara and her children. They'll receive fair compensation. More than fair, actually. I'll offer them double market value. Most widows would be grateful." Marsh gathered his papers. "Meeting adjourned. Thornton, my office. We need to discuss your contract terms." The other board members filed out, leaving Eli standing alone in the conference room, his heart hammering, his mind racing through increasingly desperate options. He could fight the contract, but that would take months in court. Could try to buy out Marsh's shares, but he didn't have that kind of liquidity. His mind went blank. There was no good option, no clever solution, just the cold reality that he'd failed Clara, failed her children, failed to be the man he'd promised to become. He thought about riding back to Montana and telling her he'd tried, but business had won anyway. Thought about seeing hope die in her eyes, seeing her pack her things, seeing her children's faces when they had to leave their home. Thought about becoming once again the bad man Lucy had asked about. Eli walked out of Montana Pacific's headquarters for the last time, leaving behind 15 years of his life, and wondered if choosing right always felt this much like losing. The train back to Montana felt twice as long as the journey to Denver, every mile weighted with failure. Eli sat alone in his car, watching his reflection in the darkened window, seeing a man who'd made promises he couldn't keep. He'd lost his company. lost his shares, his influence, his ability to stop what was coming. And worst of all, he'd have to look Clara in the eyes and tell her he'd failed. The storm hit somewhere past Helena Snow so thick the train slowed to a crawl. Eli barely noticed. His mind kept replaying the board meeting, searching for the moment he could have said something different. Argued better, convinced them. But Clayton Marsh had been right about one thing. Eli's judgment was compromised. He'd stopped thinking like a businessman the moment Lucy asked if he was the bad man. Everything since then had been emotion instinct, the desperate scramble of a man trying to become someone he'd forgotten how to be. And emotion didn't win board votes. The train finally pulled into Belmont 2 days later than scheduled, the platform buried under fresh snow. Eli hired a horse and started the ride to Clara's boarding house through drifts that came up to the animal's chest. The journey that normally took 2 hours stretched to 4, and by the time he arrived, dusk was falling, and his hands were numb despite his gloves. The boarding house glowed with lamplight smoke rising steady from the chimney. Home, Eli thought, and felt his chest tighten. For 2 weeks, this place had felt more like home than his mansion in Denver ever had. He stabled his horse and approached the door, trying to find words that would soften the blow. But there were no soft words for, "I failed you." No gentle way to say I couldn't protect you after all. Clara opened the door before he could knock, like she'd been watching for him. Her face was pale, anxious, searching his expression for answers. "Elijah." She breathed his name like a prayer. "I didn't know if the storm delayed everything, and I thought maybe—" "I came back." Eli stepped inside, bringing cold with him. "I promised I would." "And the board?" Clara's voice was carefully neutral, bracing for impact. "Did they approve Widow's Pass?" Eli looked at her, at the hope she was trying so hard to hide, and felt something break inside him. "No, they rejected it." Marsh insisted on the original route. He pulled off his gloves with numb fingers. "I resigned in protest, but it doesn't matter. Marsh is taking over Montana operations personally. He'll be here within the week to finalize acquisition." Clara swayed slightly, catching herself on the doorframe. "I see." Clara: "No, it's I understand. You tried. That's more than most would have done." Her voice was steady, but Eli saw her hands shaking. "Thank you for coming back to tell me in person. Most men would have sent a telegram." "I'm not most men." "No." Clara's smile was sad. "You're the man who tried to save us and couldn't. That's somehow worse than if you'd never tried at all." From the kitchen, Eli heard children's voices, Daniel explaining something to Lucy, Nora humming while she worked. Normal sounds that would stop being normal in a week when Marsh arrived with his lawyers and his eviction orders. "There has to be something we can do," Eli said desperately. "Legal challenges, delays, something." "With what money? What lawyer would take a case against Montana Pacific on behalf of a widow with no assets?" Clara moved toward the kitchen mechanically. "No, Elijah, it's over. I'll start packing tomorrow. Find somewhere for us to go before Marsh forces the issue." "You don't have to leave. I'll buy the property myself. Stop Marsh from—" "With what? You said you resigned, forfeited your shares. What money do you have left?" Eli opened his mouth, then closed it. She was right. His Montana Pacific shares had been the bulk of his wealth. He had some savings, some investments, but not enough to outbid a railroad company for strategic land. "Then I'll delay them. File legal challenges, tie it up in court until—" "Until what?" "Until I burn through what little money I have on lawyers. Until my children are older, and it hurts even more to lose their home." Clara's control finally cracked. "Stop trying to fix this, Elijah. You can't. You tried, you failed, and now we all have to live with the consequences." "I won't accept that." "You don't have a choice." Clara's voice rose. "Neither of us do. This is what happens when poor people stand in the way of rich people's plans. We get crushed. It doesn't matter how hard we fight or how right we are. Money wins. Power wins. People like us just survive the best we can." "Mama!" Nora appeared in the doorway, worry on her young face. "What's wrong?" Clara wiped her eyes roughly. "Nothing, sweet pea. Mr. Thornton and I are just discussing business." "Did the railroad say yes?" Daniel joined his sister Hope written all over his face. "Can we stay?" Eli watched Clara's face as she tried to find words to tell her children they were losing their home. Watched her mouth open and close, watched tears stream down her cheeks despite her efforts to hold them back. "No," Eli said before Clara could speak. "They said no. I'm sorry, Daniel. I tried to change their minds, but I failed. So we have to leave." Lucy's small voice came from behind her siblings. "We have to go away from our house." "Yes, baby." Clara knelt and opened her arms, and all three children rushed to her. "But we'll find somewhere else. Somewhere good. Mama promises." "I don't want somewhere else." Lucy was crying now. "I want here. I want our house and my new doll, and I want Mr. Eli to stay." Eli felt like his heart was being ripped from his chest. He'd done this to them, given them hope, made them believe things could be different, and then failed to deliver. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "Lucy, I'm so sorry." The little girl pulled away from her mother and ran to Eli, wrapping her small arms around his legs and sobbing into his coat. Eli stood frozen, afraid to touch her. Afraid his comfort would just make the betrayal worse. But then his hands moved of their own accord, lifting her into his arms, letting her cry against his shoulder while he murmured useless apologies into her hair. "You promised," Lucy hiccuped between sobs. "You promised you'd come back and make everything okay. I know, I broke my promise, and I'm sorrier than you'll ever know." Daniel was crying too now, trying to hide it, and Nora had her arms around her mother while Clara wept silently into her daughter's shoulder. This family he'd grown to love was breaking apart, and he was the one breaking them. "Everyone to bed," Clara finally said, her voice raw. "It's late, and we've had enough tears for one night." The children obeyed reluctantly, Lucy making Eli promise he'd still be there in the morning. He made the promise, knowing it was another one he shouldn't make another commitment he had no right to offer. When the children were finally settled, Clara and Eli sat at the kitchen table with cold coffee. Neither of them drank. The silence between them was heavy with everything they couldn't fix. "You should go back to Denver," Clara said eventually. "There's nothing more you can do here. I want to help you pack. Help you find somewhere to relocate." "No," Clara's voice was firm. I can't have you here watching us lose everything. Can't bear your pity on top of everything else." "It's not pity." "Then what is it?" "Love." Eli reached across the table for her hand. "I love you, Clara. I love your children, and I hate that I couldn't protect you." Clara pulled her hand away gently. "Love without power is just pretty words, Elijah. I need action, not affection. And since you can't give me action—" Her voice broke. "Since you can't actually save us, I need you to leave. Please, before this gets any harder." "Clara, please." She was begging now. "Please just go. Let me fall apart in private. Let me figure out how to survive this without you watching. Give me that much dignity." Eli wanted to argue, to insist he wouldn't abandon her. But looking at her face, at the exhaustion and defeat and desperate need for privacy, he understood. His presence was a reminder of failure, of hopes raised and crushed, of promises broken. "If I leave, Marsh will come. He won't be kind. I don't expect kindness from railroad men anymore." The bitterness in Clara's voice cut like a knife. "I'll take his money, pack my things, and go. That's all that's left." Eli stood slowly, every instinct screaming at him to stay, to fight to find some miracle solution. But he'd run out of miracles, run out of options, run out of everything except the hollow ache of knowing he'd let down the people who'd started to matter more than anything. "I meant it," he said quietly. "When I said I love you, That wasn't a lie. I know. Clara didn't look at him. But love isn't enough, is it? I loved Thomas, and he still died. You loved your wife and son, and they still died. Love doesn't protect anyone. It just makes losing hurt more. You're wrong. Love is the only thing that matters. Then why couldn't it save us? Eli had no answer. He stood there uselessly, wanting to say something profound or comforting or true. But all his words had been used up, worn hollow by failure. He left before dawn, riding away from the boarding house as the first light touched the mountains. He didn't look back. Couldn't bear to see the place he'd learned to call home disappearing behind him. The ride to Belmont felt like a funeral procession. Eli's mind kept circling the same useless thoughts. If only he'd argued better. If only he'd built more leverage. If only he'd been the kind of man who could actually protect the people he loved. But if onlys didn't change reality. Reality was Clara packing her things, her children losing their home, and Eli riding away because his presence only made the pain worse. He was halfway to town when he heard hoofbeats behind him. Fast, urgent someone pushing their horse hard. Eli turned to see Marcus Webb riding toward him, his face urgent with news. Boss? Thank God I caught you. Marcus, what? Telegram came this morning. From Judge Henderson. Marcus thrust the paper at Eli with shaking hands. You need to read this now. Eli unfolded the telegram, his cold fingers clumsy. The words swam before his eyes, refusing to make sense at first. Then they clicked into focus, and his heart stopped. Thornton. Stop investigated. Clara Brennan's land claim. Stop. Landlord never had legal title. Stop property was fraudulently acquired from previous owner in '78. Stop original owners, heirs willing to sell legitimate title to Mrs. Brennan for back taxes owed. Stop amount, $300. Stop advise immediate action. Stop, Henderson. Eli read it 3 times. His hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. Marcus, is this real? Judge Henderson doesn't joke about legal matters, boss. He spent the last week digging through land records after you asked him about Mrs. Brennan's situation. Found out her landlord's been collecting rent on property he stole. $300. She needs $300 and the house is legally hers. And if it's legally hers, Montana Pacific can't touch it without her consent. Marcus grinned. Boss, this changes everything. Eli wheeled his horse around, his heart hammering. I need you to ride to Belmont. Find the original owner's heirs, confirm they'll accept $300 for clear title. Get it in writing, witnessed legal. Can you do that? Already done. Henderson arranged it yesterday. All Mrs. Brennan needs to do is pay the money and sign the papers. Marcus pulled another envelope from his coat. Transfer of title all official. I've got it right here. Then I need Clara doesn't have $300. The money I gave her went to debts. Eli's mind raced. My accounts in Denver I can wire. No, that'll take too long. Marsh could arrive any day. I need cash now. Boss. Marcus's voice went quiet. You resigned from Montana Pacific. You don't have... I have a house in Denver. Furniture investments, a pocket watch that belonged to my father. Eli was already cataloging assets. Sell it all, whatever it takes to raise $300 before Marsh arrives. That'll take weeks. We don't have weeks. Eli looked at Marcus, then at the boarding house visible in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney into the cold morning air. He thought about Clara, packing about Lucy, crying about the family he'd failed to protect. He thought about the gold wedding ring on his finger, the last piece of Mary he'd kept. Yes, we do. Eli pulled off the ring, held it in his palm. Mary had been dead 10 years. The ring couldn't bring her back, couldn't change what had happened. But maybe it could save the living. Take this to the jeweler in Belmont. It's worth at least $300. Tell him I'll buy it back when I can, but if I can't... Eli's voice caught. If I can't, that's fine too. Just get me the money today. Marcus stared at the ring. Boss, that's you can't. I can and I am. My wife is dead, Marcus. She'd want this ring used for something meaningful, not gathering dust while I hide from life. Eli pressed the ring into Marcus's hand. Go. Now. Meet me back at Mrs. Brennan's within 2 hours with the money and the transfer papers. Marcus rode off at a gallop, and Eli turned his horse back toward the boarding house, his heart racing with something that felt dangerously like hope. He found Clara in the yard taking down frozen laundry with mechanical efficiency. Her face was red from cold and crying, and she didn't look up when Eli's horse approached. I asked you to leave, she said. I know, but something's happened, something that changes everything. Nothing changes. Your landlord never had legal title to this property. Judge Henderson investigated. The land was fraudulently acquired. The rightful owner's heirs are willing to sell you clear title for $300. Clara's hands stilled on the laundry. What? If you own clear title, Montana Pacific can't take it. They'd need your consent, which you'd never give. The house would be yours, Clara. Legally, permanently yours. Clara turned slowly, and Eli saw hope warring with fear in her eyes. $300. I don't have Elijah. I have maybe $40 to my name after paying debts. Where would I get? I have it. Or I will in 2 hours when Marcus gets back from selling my wedding ring. The words hung between them. Clara's eyes widened. No, Elijah, I can't let you. That's your wife's ring. Your last piece of her. Mary's gone. Has been for 10 years. Eli dismounted and moved toward Clara slowly. But you're here. Your children are here. Living, breathing, needing help I can actually provide. And I think Mary would approve of this ring saving a family instead of sitting in a box in my drawer, reminder of everything I lost. But you loved her. I did. I loved her and I lost her, and I spent 10 years punishing myself for it. But she wouldn't want that. Mary was practical, kind, believed in helping people who needed it. Eli took Clara's cold hands in his. She'd want this ring used for something good, and saving your home, that's good. That's right. Clara was crying again, but different tears now. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you sacrificing. You deserve everything. Eli pulled her close, letting her cry against his chest. You deserve security, peace, a home your children can grow up in. You deserve someone who chooses you over business, over convenience, over protecting himself. And if selling my wedding ring proves I'm that person, then it's the best use that ring could have. I'll pay you back. Every penny. I'll work, I'll save. I don't want you to pay me back. Eli tilted her face up to meet his eyes. I want you to let me do this one thing right. Let me be the man who saved you instead of the man who failed you. Clara searched his face, and Eli let her see everything, the fear, the hope, the desperate need to fix what he'd broken. Okay, she whispered. Okay. They stood there in the frozen yard, holding each other, until Marcus returned, riding hard, with a leather pouch that jingled with coins and papers that smelled of ink and official stamps. $312, Marcus announced, slightly out of breath. Jeweler paid premium because the ring was good quality. And here's the transfer papers, all official and witnessed. Clara took the money with shaking hands, staring at it like she didn't quite believe it was real. I'm buying my house. I'm actually buying my house. You're buying your home, Eli corrected. And saving your children's future. And stopping Clayton Marsh from destroying something precious. They rode to Judge Henderson's office in Belmont that afternoon. Eli, Clara, Marcus, and all 3 children bundled into a wagon. The judge was waiting with the original owner's heirs, an elderly couple who'd been cheated decades ago and were grateful to finally see justice done. The paperwork took an hour. Signatures, witnesses' official seals. Clara's hands shook so badly she could barely write her name. But when she finally set down the pen and Judge Henderson handed her the title deed, her face transformed. This is mine, she said, staring at the document. Legally, officially mine. They can't take it. Nobody can take it, Henderson confirmed. This deed is recorded legitimate, unassailable. Your home is secure, Mrs. Brennan. Clara looked at Eli, and her eyes were full of tears and gratitude and something deeper. You did this. You actually saved us. We did this together. You found the alternate route. Judge Henderson found the fraud. Marcus negotiated the sale. Eli stopped, emotion closing his throat. I just loved you enough to try. Lucy tugged on Eli's coat. Mr. Eli, does this mean we don't have to leave? That's exactly what it means, sweetheart. You get to stay in your house forever if you want. Lucy threw her arms around his waist, and Daniel joined her, and even Nora dignified too. Adult Nora let herself be pulled into the embrace. Clara stood watching the deed clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she mouthed to Eli over her children's heads. Thank you. When Clayton Marsh arrived 3 days later with his lawyers and his eviction orders, he found Clara Brennan waiting on her porch with clear title in hand and Judge Henderson beside her. Eli stood slightly behind, letting Clara have her moment. Mrs. Brennan, Marsh began smoothly. I'm here to finalize the property acquisition. I have papers. I'm not interested in your papers, Mr. Marsh. Clara's voice was steady. This property belongs to me. Legal title properly recorded beyond your reach. Marsh's confidence faltered. That's impossible. My research showed. Your research was based on fraudulent documents from a landlord who never had legitimate claim. Judge Henderson stepped forward. Mrs. Brennan now owns clear title, which means Montana Pacific's acquisition is void. This is Thornton's doing. Marsh turned to Eli with undisguised rage. You manipulated this somehow, undermined the company. I saved a family's home. Eli interrupted. Something you'd never understand because you think people are just obstacles to profit. You betrayed Montana Pacific, broke your contract, destroyed our timeline, cost us. I quit Montana Pacific, remember? Which means I don't answer to you anymore. Eli moved to stand beside Clara. And this woman owns her land. You want it, you negotiate with her, fairly, respectfully, or you reroute through Widow's Pass like I suggested from the beginning. Marsh's face went purple with fury. This isn't over, Thornton. I'll sue you for breach of contract, for sue away. I'll countersue for harassment and intimidation of a widow. We'll see whose reputation survives the newspapers. Eli smiled coldly. Oh, and Clayton Judge Henderson has evidence of your attempts to use fraudulent writs to threaten Mrs. Brennan's children. Territorial authorities might find that interesting. Marsh looked between Eli, Clara, and the judge, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he turned to his lawyers with a disgusted gesture. File the reroute papers. We're using Widow's Pass. He looked at Clara with contempt. Congratulations, Mrs. Brennan. You've won your precious house. I hope it's worth the enemies you've made. It is, Clara said simply. Because I didn't make enemies. I made family. She took Eli's hand, and he felt something settle in his chest. Something that felt like coming home after 10 years of wandering. Marsh and his lawyers left, and suddenly the porch was full of people. Judge Henderson clapping Eli on the shoulder, Marcus grinning, the children shouting with joy. Neighbors who'd heard the news coming to congratulate Clara. But Eli only saw Clara standing in front of her house. That was finally truly, legally hers, looking at him with eyes full of love and gratitude and possibility. You gave up everything for this, she said quietly. Your company, your fortune, your wife's ring. What do you have left? Eli looked at her children playing in the snow at the boarding house that would never be taken from them. Everything that matters, he said. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Clara and Eli sat on the porch watching snow fall soft through the darkness. The air was cold enough to burn, but Eli barely felt it. What happens now? Clara asked. You have no job, no company. I have a house, but barely any income. We're both starting over. Then we start over together. Eli took her hand. I have some savings left. Enough to buy surveying equipment, start a small engineering firm, help other homesteaders, other families trying to protect their land from men like Marsh. That's a significant step down from railroad magnate. It's a step toward being human instead of successful. I'll take that trade. Clara was quiet for a moment then. The children love you. Lucy asks every night if you're staying. Daniel wants to learn surveying from you. Even Nora, who trusts nobody, trusts you. And what about their mother? What does she want? She wants... Clara's voice caught. She wants to believe this is real, that you're not going to wake up tomorrow and regret giving up everything for a widow with 3 children and a boarding house that barely breaks even. I won't regret it. I regret the 10 years I wasted being afraid to feel. I don't regret the last 2 weeks learning to live again. Elijah, marry me. The words came out before Eli could stop them, impulsive and terrifying and absolutely right. Not because it's practical, or because the children need a father, or because you need financial security. Marry me because I love you, and I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. Marry me because you make me remember what it means to be brave. Clara stared at him, tears streaming down her face. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Impulsive, financially irresponsible, probably too soon. Is that a no? That's a yes, you impossible man. Clara laughed through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Because you sacrificed everything to save my home. Because you see my children as blessings instead of burdens. Because you kissed me on that mountain and made me believe in second chances. Eli pulled her close and kissed her, properly tasting snow and salt, and the sweetness of promises that might actually be kept. When they broke apart, Clara was smiling, the first real smile he'd seen from her. We're both insane, she said, starting over with nothing but love and hope. Love and hope are more than I've had in 10 years. I'll take my chances. They sat wrapped in each other as snow continued to fall, covering the world in fresh white, making everything clean and new. Inside, the children slept warm and safe in the home they'd never have to leave. And Eli thought about Mary and Samuel, about how they'd want him to have this happiness, family love that wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. Thank you, he whispered to the night to his wife, who was 10 years gone to whatever mercy had brought him to a freezing boarding house to collect a debt he'd never actually wanted. Clara must have heard him, because she squeezed his hand and said, she'd be proud of you for choosing life instead of survival. How do you know? Because any woman who loved you would want you to be happy, even if it meant moving on. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. Love doesn't end when people die, Elijah. It just changes shape. Your love for Mary became the love that saved us. That's not betrayal. That's grace. Eli felt something release in his chest, some knot of guilt he'd been carrying for a decade. Clara was right. Mary would have wanted this for him, would have approved of his wedding ring, buying a family's home of his choice to love again, despite the risk. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and revealing green underneath. Eli and Clara were married in April by Reverend Clayton in a simple ceremony, attended by everyone who mattered. Marcus Judge Henderson, Martha Yates, even some townspeople who'd judged Clara harshly but came to apologize. Lucy wore a crown of wildflowers, and Daniel gave Clara away with solemn pride. Nora read a poem she'd written about second chances and new beginnings. Eli's engineering firm grew slowly but steadily, helping homesteaders protect their claims, surveying land for fair prices, choosing people over profit every time. Clara's boarding house became profitable once word spread that she and the reformed railroad magnate would help families in need. The children thrived. Lucy lost her cornhusk doll somewhere around her 6th birthday and didn't miss it because she had so many other toys. Daniel grew tall and serious, becoming Eli's apprentice in surveying. Nora went to teachers' college in Denver, making her mother weep with pride. And Eli learned that choosing right over safe love over protection, vulnerability over control, was the hardest and best decision he'd ever made. He'd lost an empire, but gained a family. Lost his fortune, but gained peace. Lost the man he'd been and became someone better. Sometimes on cold winter nights, he'd think about the boarding house he'd ridden to collect a debt, about the fierce widow who'd faced him down with a rifle and stubbornness. About how he'd come to take everything and ended up giving everything instead. About how sometimes losing everything you thought mattered was the only way to find what actually did. Clara would find him on those nights, wrap her arms around him from behind, and whisper, "No regrets." And Eli would turn and kiss her and say with absolute certainty, "Not a single one. You saved me, Clara, just as much as I saved you." "We saved each other," she'd correct. "That's how love works." And standing in the home they'd fought for, surrounded by children they'd protected, living the life they'd chosen, despite every obstacle, Eli knew she was right. Love wasn't about control or protection or avoiding pain. Love was about showing up, staying present, choosing courage over safety every single day. It was messy and risky and sometimes terrifying. It was also the only thing worth dying for and the only thing worth living for. And Eli Thornton, who'd spent 10 years learning how to survive loss, finally understood what it meant to embrace life instead.